Hi, and welcome to our program. Today we are visiting the Recreational Fear Lab here at Aarhus University. Let's talk to the director, Matthias Clenson, to know more about it. Follow me. Hi, Matthias.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're very welcome.
So, where are we? What is this lab?
This is the Recreational Fear Lab, which is a research center at Aarhus University. Mm-hmm. And what we are interested in here is, as the name suggests, recreational fear, which means activities in which people derive pleasure from fear. So when is it fun to be scared? How can you measure fear and enjoyment? Why are people attracted to frightening leisure activities like horror movies or haunted houses or extreme sports or children's games that involve, this unique combination of positive and negative emotion, fear and enjoyment.
So extreme sports is also included in this fear sphere or something like that?
I would say so, yeah. You can imagine a big conceptual map of the land of recreational fear.
Okay.
And so what characterizes this land is activities that are all about being scared but also enjoying it. And so you find different areas, like you have a big dark forest in the middle, okay. And that is horror.
Okay.
Horror movies, horror games, horror literature.
Everything.
Yes. But you also have a space which is true crime. Like a lot of people enjoy listening to true crime podcasts, which is also about immersing yourself imaginatively into this world full of danger and dangerous men and gruesome murders and things like that.
Just a small question. Do people react differently when it's like, imagine a novel that they know that it's fiction, and like for instance this true crime thing, because it's based in true stories, do they react differently because they know one is fiction and the one is...
Yes, that is the big difference.
Okay.
But it's not like a binary situation, like fiction, reality, black, white, on, off. It's more of a kind of spectrum of plausibility. So like I'm watching The Exorcist, classic horror movie. Girl gets possessed by an ancient demon. I think that is not very plausible. It still scares me. And then I listen to, or I watch a documentary about Jeffrey Dahmer. And I know this happened, and he was real, and people like that exist. That is a lot more plausible. So an important concept here is the concept of psychological distance. How close do you feel something is to you? Okay. And horror is always trying to minimize psychological distance. For example, by claiming this movie is based on real events, or
trigger something.
Yeah, exactly. Or using a kind of what you might call an authenticity aesthetic, like the Blair Witch Project, shaky cam. The cinematography is terrible, and that characterizes found footage. Paranormal activity is another example, because it looks real, right? Okay. Or it looks the way it would have looked if it were real. So if you can manipulate people to at least entertain the possibility that this might happen, they might be possessed by a demon, or get lost in the woods chasing a witch, or get murdered and eaten by Jeffrey Dahmer, then that's more scary, yes.
Okay, and you were saying about the land?
Yeah. So the land of recreational fear, there is also an area that we can call extreme sports. Okay. It's not something we study in this lab, but I see it as part of the land of recreational fear. Okay. Because it's also about being frightened, but enjoying that, arousal and the horror of knowing that maybe the line snaps and you will plummet to sudden violent death. Yeah. The difference is there is actual danger involved in extreme sport. That is not the case in true crime, horror movies, children's activities, going on a roller coaster in Djurs Sommerland or Tivoli or whatever, which is also a kind of recreational fear.
Okay, so everything that is kind of related to like adrenaline rush or this type of thing can be classified or can be put into this land?
I think so.
Okay, and now another question. You mentioned children's activities. What do you mean by that?
This is where I think it gets interesting, because what we originally started looking at was horror. And that is like that, like if you take recreational fear and you put it into, imagine it like a medieval crazy scientist in his lab, with the beard going in all directions, and he's trying to create gold and So he has this vial, and he puts recreational fear in it, and puts a flame under it, and distills it. And the distilled result is horror. That is the purest expression of recreational fear, because it's about fear and enjoyment. That's it. But we started thinking about the phenomenon more broadly, like in terms of recreational fear, which includes horror, but also other kinds of things. And this is where it gets interesting, because those activities, recreational fear activities, where people derive pleasure from fear, they're everywhere. Like once you start looking for them, you'll see them everywhere. People do so many things to pursue fear, which is a little bit counterintuitive and paradoxical, because we think of fear as a negative emotion, something we want to avoid. Evidently, people do many things to seek it out. And it begins very early in ontogeny, which is individual development. So one of the first things we do to get a laugh out of a child is a baby jump scare, known as peekaboo.
Yes.
And we throw them into the air and catch them. And we do all kinds of things, like we chase them and pretend to be monsters, and they hide in a dark closet, and their heart is hammering, and they feel the bony fingers of anxiety, going down their spine. And they know it's not real, but still, the heart is hammering and the palms get a little bit clammy. So kids love recreational fear activities. And so that's one example of how this phenomenon is very widespread, it's pervasive in human culture, but it's also scientifically understudied. We don't know much about it. But we have started some preliminary charting of the landscape of children and young people's engagement with recreational fear activities.
Okay. This is so weird. Like it's something that you don't really think about, that you have been in such close contact with this type of activities from such an early age.
Yeah.
And you did a study more specifically about Denmark in the lab, right?
Yeah.
What were the findings?
Yeah, so we did sort of a pilot study, or rather we had two really excellent interns who did this study, and what we asked them to do was to find out something about the frequency of recreational fear activities in Danish daycare institutions. So nursery homes and kindergartens.
Okay, so it's not at home, it's only physically.
Yeah, and so they called institutions, they talked to teachers, they said, do you scare the shit out of the kids? And the teachers would say, no, what are you thinking about? And then they kind of changed the question and said, do you, in your institution, have any activities that are about scaring the kids a little bit, but also making sure that they enjoy it? And it turns out it's everywhere. Yeah. So there are really a lot of activities in which the teachers, let the kids play with fear, but they constantly regulate the stimulus. So if they can see, I'm reading a story to the kids, it's too much for them, they get frightened by the scary voice I'm doing, and when I pretend to be the troll, they'll make this voice a little bit, higher pitched. And so that pilot study inspired us to do a much more comprehensive survey-based study of recreational fear activities among 1 to 17-year-old Danish kids, where we talked to 1,600, or we hired somebody to talk to 1,600 Danish parents.
Okay, and what were the findings of that second part?
We don't really know yet, because we're still looking at the data, but it looks like it's really pervasive again, and there are some systematic patterns. Like small kids, it's very much about what developmental psychologists call risky play. So physical activities like riding your bike too fast downhill, or climbing up a tree, and again feeling the arousal. And when they get older, their fascination with recreational fear becomes more directed at mediated things like scary movies or television shows. But it never goes away. It just kind of changes its target.
So how can you tell us? What can you tell us about how our relationship with fear changes throughout our lives? Because you have studied children, youngsters, and then in here, which is the minimum? What is the minimum age?
18.
18. So it's like adults. Like, is there any a conclusion or like a pattern that you see besides the fact that it doesn't go away?
It doesn't. No, there is an age effect. So if we look at horror specifically, the appetite for horror increases, and then it peaks in the late teenage years, and then it gradually kind of slowly goes down.
Okay. Do you have any idea why?
Yeah, I think so. It makes sense that it will be the teenagers who are kind of the prime audience of horror movies, because they're the ones who are in a phase in their lives where they have to carve out a niche for themselves. They have to go into the world on their own 2 feet. They have to find their boundaries and challenge them and challenge the boundaries of everybody else. That's why it can be a little bit tough to have a teenager in the house. So they're all about challenging boundaries, including their own boundaries. And one way in which they do that is by seeking out scary entertainment as a kind of challenge. You know, how much can I take? Here's a really scary movie. Can I do it? Let's see.
Is it like practice for the real world?
I
Not
think
necessarily in a scary way, but like for the other challenges that are not maybe physically dangerous, but are dangerous in other...
Yeah, I think that's the underlying kind of mechanism, that it is a kind of preparation in a kind of safe space, because it's just make-believe, you know, it's just movies, it's actors, it's... And I don't think if you ask a teenager, why are you watching horror movies every Saturday night? They won't say, I'm practicing for real life. They'll say it's fun.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why they think it's fun is ultimately because horror can be a mechanism for practicing coping strategies and fear regulation and learning something about your own psychological landscape. What does it feel like for me to be under a lot of pressure? How do I react? How much can I take? How can I regulate it?
Yeah, because it's something quite important to learn.
That is a super important skill that we need in all kinds of different domains, like keeping anxiety down.
So horror movies or horror novels or games, whatever they choose, can help with that.
We think so. We did one study in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic where we looked at whether people who watch a lot of horror movies had better psychological resilience than people who stay away from that stuff. Because we thought, well, maybe if you have a lot of practice, you know, being frightened and keeping fear at a level that you can tolerate, and, you know, coping with anxiety and fear and just dread and disgust and terror and all of those negative emotions, maybe you can take that skill and apply it in a real world situation, like a lockdown, which is stressful. And we did find that people who watch many horror movies reported fewer symptoms of psychological distress. They didn't have as many problems falling asleep or, you know, staying focused.
That's quite cool. That is quite cool. So let's talk a little bit about the lab itself. So how did the lab started?
Well, I think it kind of grew organically. Like a creepy mushroom in a dark cave, you know.
Have you always been involved, or?
Yeah, I have. So I've been working with horror for a long time. I did my PhD on horror literature mainly, way 10 years ago. But I wanted to do not just, you know, literary interpretation and conceptual theoretical work. I wanted to do more kind of empirical work, you know, go out into the world, collect data, analyze it. And so I teamed up with some really, really smart, excellent colleagues, and we started thinking about maybe doing haunted house research. And because I knew that since Halloween has kind of become big in Denmark, like the American tradition of Halloween, we have had a few haunted houses pop up in this country. And a haunted house it's sort of a building that is designed to be scary. Usually a Halloween phenomenon, so it exists in October. And it has actors in scary makeup and scary costume. And guests pay money to go through 50 scary rooms and be frightened for about an hour. And the scariest haunted house in Denmark is in Vejle, in something called Dark Valley, appropriately enough.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so I'd been in contact with the people who made that because I've done a little bit of consulting for them. And we asked them, can we come and collect data? And they said, sure. And so we did the first study in 2016.
Oh, okay.
You know, put together a whole team, went to Dark Valley, distributed questionnaires, and the following year we put up surveillance cameras and we put like heart rate monitors on guests. We had a workshop and this guy, the Mr. Piggy, who is one of the characters in the haunted house that we were talking about. We put everybody, all the conference workshop participants against the wall, said you need to smile for the picture. Okay. And then a guy wearing that mask came running with a chainsaw toward them. I don't have anything like that planned for today.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
No, I get jump scares very easily, so it would not be fun.
No.
But I do like horror movies.
Yeah. So yes, we did the first haunted house study in 2016, and then we've done that every year. Like it's the 7th year now that we're doing haunted house research. And that really became kind of the seed that grew into the mushroom that is the lab, which we established in 2020.
Okay.
With a generous grant from a science foundation.
That's quite cool.
Mm-hmm.
I just remembered something, because now that I just mentioned that I like horror movies, I don't like horror movies that this happens. For instance, I like the psychological ones. Do you analyze the difference between these two, or do you focus in a more specific one?
Yeah, no, we have done a little bit of work on that sort of thing, and it's true that when you look at horror media, you can make a rough division between supernatural horror and psychological horror. So horror movies in which things that really violate the physical principles of the world happen, like demonic possession or ghosts or
like a pig, like
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Technically someone could kill a pig and do this.
They could, yeah, carve off its face and use it as a mask. That would be possible. So that would be psychological horror.
Okay.
And actually, if you ask people, most people say they prefer psychological horror.
Okay.
Still, supernatural horror, it plays a huge role at the box office. So there are many supernatural horror movies.
Do you feel like the reactions are different? Because supernatural, I mean, I'm saying this from my perspective that doesn't know anything on the topic. Supernatural seems a bit like it's harder to believe, right? There's this distance that you mentioned. It's kind of big. Yeah. And with like this, this is kind of possible. So it kind of. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like it's scarier. Yeah,
for some people, but still, even the supernatural horror movies tend to be designed in such a way to kind of counteract your skepticism.
Okay.
So if I watch a really scary ghost movie, I don't believe in ghosts, but I do when I've watched a really scary ghost movie and it's late at night and I'm home alone and I have to go into the basement and I hear this weird noise and I'm pretty sure that's probably a ghost. Do I believe in ghosts? No. But the movie still made me entertain the possibility that maybe there are disembodied agents of evil in the world. And if there are, they probably want to drain my soul and torment me. But you're right, I mean, there is a big difference between something that you feel is plausible and something that you feel is implausible. Yeah. But really good supernatural horror movies can kind of extinguish that skepticism, at least for a while.
Okay, going back to the haunted house. What type of, so you said that you've been doing the research there since 2016, right?
That's right.
So what changed? Did you change your approach? You said that you started with surveys, then you were putting monitors on people and the surveillance cameras. So how is it happening right now?
Well, it's really a new research question every year, and we have these meetings where we talk about what should we do next year, because the haunted house is there, the data is awesome, partly because there are limits to what you can do in a lab. Like I couldn't invite participants in and then have that guy attack them and then measure heart rate. That would never fly with the research ethics committee. But in the haunted house, they can do what they do, and we can come and we can observe and measure. And so every year it's a new research question, and we're getting, researchers from other countries are getting in touch because they've heard about these studies that we do.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and they'll say, could we investigate this, or how about looking at that? So every year a new approach, new research question, new methods.
Okay, that is quite nice.
Mm.
Maybe we can go inside and we can talk more about what you do in the lab.
For sure. Right. So this is kind of our cinema setup. So we have a couple of very comfortable chairs where participants can sit, and so we'll put them in the chairs. They can sit. They can lean back if they want.
Ah, that's cozy.
And they can watch a horror movie on our big screen.
Yeah, pretty big screen.
Pretty big. It's an 85-inch screen. Because that makes a difference, you know. It's all about immersion, and it's about eliminating distraction. Because if you watch a horror movie and you get distracted, like if you start thinking about what do I need to buy for dinner tomorrow, that's one way to reduce fear. And so you'll notice that movie theaters are always painted black, and the screen takes up almost all of the visual field. Yeah. So there is only the stimulus, and that's kind of what we're going for here. And so participants will sit here and watch something, and we will put different sensors on them to measure their response. The hand grips, for example.
Oh, what is that?
It measures hand grip strength.
Ah, okay.
So you'll just be watching the film and holding this in your hand, and the idea is when people get scared, they squeeze. Yeah. Like we talk about white knucklers. People who watch a horror movie and they start doing this, so the knuckles turn white.
They're like ready to fight or something?
Yeah. And so we thought maybe we can measure this throughout, a whole movie, somebody just holding it in their hands, and when they get really tense, they literally get really tense and they squeeze. And so it measures. It measures their response. So that's one sensor that we're using. We have some other sensors also. So if we look over here, like we'll use something like this, where we can collect a whole bunch of different biosignals. Okay. So we'll put electrodes on people. For example, we ran out, but a couple of electrodes this size. Put them on their fingers, like that, and hook them up to this device. And so we can measure EDA, which is skin conductance. How much do people sweat? Okay. And we do that by sending a very mild current, like giving them a little bit of electrical shock. They don't feel it at all. It's the same principle as a lie detector. Okay. So you measure how much are they sweating. You measure heart rate. You measure muscle activation in the neck muscles, because when people feel suspense, they tend to, we measure skin temperature, because if we detect somebody sweating, that might mean that they're afraid. It could also mean that they're getting really angry. But when you get really angry, the skin temperature rises, and when you get afraid, the skin temperature drops. Okay. Yeah. Is there a particular reason? Do you know a little bit about that? Yeah. So many of the body's resources, if you're in a situation where you feel under threat, like if you see the man with the pig's mask come running toward you, what you need to do is fight or flee. And so you need blood in the big muscle groups in your legs and in your arms. Okay. And so the blood, the resources are diverted away from the digestive system. So you'll feel a little bit of butterflies in your stomach. Ah, so that's what that is. That's what that is. Okay. And blood also goes away from the extremities, directed toward the muscles, so that you are ready. Yeah, responding adequately. So we measure all of those things to get these fear measurements and to find out how can we best measure fear. Is it a combination of galvanic skin response, so sweat, and skin temperature? Do we need muscle activation, or the squeezing thing, or how much people jump back and forth in the cinema seats, because we can also measure that. And so all of that is fed into a computer, and we use that data. And how can you know that this type of data is fear and not something else? Right. It's like a guide or something. We can ask people. So they can watch the same film again without all of the sensors, and we give them a little device that I don't know where is, but it looks like like a button they can turn.
Okay.
And we asked them to constantly, as they're watching, indicate how afraid they were when they watched it the first time. So we get subjective fear ratings, we get objective physiological measurements, and the computer can see, okay, so in this scene they said it was a 9 out of 0 to 10. On the fear scale, the heart rate spiked, the temperature in the skin went down, they sweated a lot, it's probably fear. So that's one way to do it. Combine subjective self-report measure with objective physiological measure.
Is there something else that you would like to try out here? Something else that you would like to measure? Something that you find relevant?
We have many. Any way you can measure this, yeah. Give us all of it. I think we also have this depth camera that measures how far away people are from the camera. And some people will move a lot in their chairs when they're watching a horror movie, like removing themselves from it, again, to increase physical distance and so maybe psychological distance. Maybe interaction, like we have 2 seats. What happens if you put 2 strangers? What if they find each other attractive? What happens then to their behavior? That sort of thing would be fun to look at.
I read somewhere that for some people, like watching a horror movie together can be like a bonding experience because it's like they went through something traumatizing together. Yeah. So would that kind of be what you would like to measure, like in the case of strangers or maybe friends?
Yeah, sure. And we have we did a study a couple of years ago in the haunted house where we looked, because people go through in groups, and like most horror experiences, it's an essentially social experience. Almost nobody watches horror movies alone. Almost nobody goes to a haunted house alone. And so, are there any bonding effects? Are group ties strengthened, or is there a strengthened kind of group identity? We think there is. We're not done with the data analysis. But it looks like if you're in a haunted house with somebody that you feel emotionally close to, that actually increases your arousal, which is not what we were expecting. Like we were expecting that people would go to a haunted house with, a partner or a friend to kind of feel more safe and so keep fear down. But it looks like the opposite is happening. Maybe because they don't feel inhibited. They feel they can express their fear. Maybe because they mirror each other's fear, and so that strengthens their own fear, and that strengthens the other person's fear. It becomes a whole feedback loop. We don't know yet, but I'm very interested in those social dynamics of recreational fear.
That was it for this program, but stay tuned for the next one. In the meantime, don't forget to check our Facebook page, BURT, for updates on our schedules and programs. See you soon.